So we'll call the meeting to order. This is the wrap-up meeting for the Commission to Study Advanced Nuclear Power. And we have a simple agenda for today's meeting. We're going to approve or modify the minutes from our previous meeting on November the 6th. And then we'll discuss the draft report that everybody has in front of them, and if we're comfortable signing off or we're going to make additional changes to this. So I think those are our options.
Mr. Chair, I move the minutes as presented.
All right, Senator Pearl moves the minutes, and so the report contains about 50 pages of content, and then an additional 50 or so pages of all the meeting minutes. So this is a compilation of all of our efforts for the last year in one package. So the minutes from the November 6th meeting start on page 100, yeah, and go to the rest of the document.
I'll second. I'll second Senator Pearl's motion.
All right, any discussion? All right, all in favor of approving the November 6 minutes?
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? All right, and that is 6 of us, so that's a quorum. All right. So this was an ordeal. The subject matter, as we all found out, is pretty intense. And Matt, you know, from working at Seabrook, you know, just the conventional nuclear power plants are complicated, but this kind of breaks the mold and gets even more complicated with all different types of fuels and heat transfer mediums and different sizes of designs. So this report is a compilation of all the minutes, sort of kind of refactored into subject matter area. Hey, welcome, Mark.
Sorry.
That's okay. And I think there's one more for you.
We did nominate you to be chair, showing any meetings going forward after this.
Yeah, well, ask how nominating as secretary turned out.
You were replaced with a computer.
Thank you very much.
All right, Mark, we just took a vote on approving the November 6 minutes. I sent those out, I think, Monday, so you should have a copy of those in advance. All right, and now we're just discussing the final report. I'd give this is my personal opinion, having done a lot of it, this is probably a B effort. If we had a little more time, I think I'd make some tweaks to it. I sent this out yesterday, which I know is last minute for a document this size. But with holidays and I had a trip, I was traveling this month, so I didn't have all the free time I hoped I had. So yeah, if you've had a chance to look it over, a lot of the material was in our interim report. So we had, the interim report covered meetings up until June. So we had 4 meetings since then. So what I went and did was went back through the different sections and sort of updated, refreshed them to include more recent information that we received. So I guess if you want a few minutes just to look it over, and then we can discuss what our next steps are. And I have one extra copy here if anybody would like to, on the Alvin, if you'd like to see one.
Mr. Chair, the changes that you made in the update from the interim report, is there a specific section that those are in so we could review those?
Yeah, so the changes were throughout, and
Okay.
keeping track of the changes, the document just looked like,
Got it.
so I did not do that. But
Okay.
if we do make any changes from here on out, we will, I don't expect them to be major. We will track changes. If the changes are minor, I brought my laptop, we can make tweaks as we go, but. So I'll walk, as you guys are reading it, if you don't mind me talking, I'll just walk through the sections. So we have a cover page, table of contents, and then the beginning of the final report. There's an overview of the commission, It references the commission's mandate, which is on Appendix A. It lists the members of our commission. Senator Pearl, you replaced Senator Gannon after the new term. And our member from the New Hampshire Bureau of Department of Business and Economic Affairs, he has since resigned from his position. That was McHale. So I did not list him here because he wasn't a member for very long. And then I have an executive summary of the entire report. And then there's a list of all the meetings, beginning with our October 11th meeting from last year. And there's just a summary of what we went through, the different presenters that came, and just a very short outline on what they presented. And then each section has a link to the meetings or to the minute meetings in the back, if people would like to drill into more detail. And then on page 10, there's an introduction. Gives an overview of advanced nuclear technologies. And then the importance of nuclear in modern power generation. Existing nuclear power in ISO New England. So we have a list of some of the different, actually there's two current plants in ISO New England and some that have been shuttered. And then there's a list of recent nuclear energy projects in the US. And there's several there, including some demonstration projects. On page 14, I mentioned NuScale and UAMPS, and I gave an update on that. They've since parted ways. So a little bit of overview on that. Was going to be a first of a kind project that has gotten shuttered. NuScale did make an announcement on November the 20th of this year that they have a new partnership with the DOE. So that last paragraph there talks about that. And then it discusses the nuclear enlightenment period. That was the American Nuclear Society had that concept that there used to be a nuclear renaissance, and they classify this as a nuclear enlightenment, and it's more driven by decarbonizing the electric grid. Talks about some recent movies, Oppenheimer and Nuclear Now in the next section. So that's popular culture. And then it's some information about our regional energy markets, how
They're broken.
it was yeah, well, basically what ISO New England kind of presented to us, that the energy mix is coal and oil are diminishing greatly. Natural gas and renewables are ramping up. Then there's a section on potential benefits of advanced nuclear technology. And then it talks about some of the aspects of it, like the modular construction and transportability, the fact that nuclear has high energy density. So there's a graphic here from the Department of Energy National that talks about the uranium, the size of the tip of your pinky finger can replace an entire ton of coal. So it's a very high energy density medium. And it talks about how it's continuous energy supply, so it's not intermittent. And then on page 18, the ability to load follow. So these new designs can ramp up and down to sort of like partner with renewables. And then it talks about the passive safety systems. So they use sort of the laws of physics to shut down safely. It's kind of different from the older style of nuclear power plants. And I think we heard in our testimony, Fukushima had an issue because their generators were below the sea level. And those generators were needed to keep the system in a safe state. And so those generators got flooded, weren't operational, and that's really the main issue that they had. So these new designs don't have that exposure, according to the manufacturers. And then it talks about small energy planning zones. So I think, is it 10-mile radius for Seabrook, or 10 to 25 mile? So a lot of these manufacturers talk about an emergency planning zone that's just the footprint of the site, you know, maybe just a half an acre or an acre. And that's still being fleshed out by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but that's the desired planning zone that they're talking about. And then it talks about carbon-free energy generation that nuclear provides, potential benefits to New Hampshire's economy. We heard about national security implications from not having a robust nuclear program in our country, that China and Russia may be getting ahead of the US on that. And as they develop relationships with the rest of the world, that sort of cements them as a leader in the nuclear energy industry. And that, so we have some catch up to do nationally. And there's some national security risks if we don't do that. And then it goes into the different advanced nuclear reactor technologies. It was a little difficult to classify each different design, you know, perfectly under a subheading, because some of them are in multiple categories. But so I'm on page 21. So we talked about light water SMRs. So those are more similar to traditional nuclear power plants, but smaller in scale, 50 to 300 megawatts. And then we listed some of the manufacturers that are under that category. And then there's high temperature gas reactors. One in particular that stood out was X Energy. So they have triso fuel pebbles, they're called, but they look like billiard balls. So it's sort of like a self-contained fuel packet. And there's hundreds of them in a bin that kind of circulate like a bubblegum machine. And they use helium gas to cool and to extract the heat from the process. So that would be a high temperature gas reactor. Anybody want to chime in on anything? Should I keep going? Okay. Yeah.
Now, I have to double check it. Google. Did the Terra power plant use gas technology too?
So I have it listed under molten salt reactors on page 23.
And that could be done on there.
So, and if there are any inaccuracies on this, let's update it. But my understanding is they're using molten salt.
But that's for the storage aspect of it.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's would you mind
I'm looking it up.
checking me on that?
You know, I just wanna make sure.
And I can move it just by in the Word document. And then we heard from Moltex back in October. And they have an interesting project where they're building, I believe it's in New Brunswick. They're building a 600 megawatt waste burning reactor, and they're going to co-locate it with an existing nuclear power plant. So they're going to take the waste. So when we went to Seabrook and we saw that building where all the waste is held, Moltex is going to, you know, in a similar arrangement, they're going to build a waste recycling plant, and then use that waste to power their 600 megawatt reactor. So they're recycling, you know, slightly used nuclear fuel, and they're going to run for, I think, 60 years. So that's on page 23. So that was an interesting project. And then there's something called a fast neutron reactor. And there's a little overview of what that entails on page 24. And Oklo was classified as a fast neutron reactor. And I think they also do something with recycling. They're going to recycle and reuse spent fuel. And then we heard from several micro reactor. So these are like 1 to 20 megawatt plants that their market is targeted towards like diesel generators. So if you have like a mining operation somewhere off grid that uses a lot of diesel fuel to power their operation, these would sort of be like drop-in replacements for large diesel generators. So that's their target. Not quite a good fit for New Hampshire, possibly, but you could see maybe something like in the North Country, or it wouldn't require an interconnection, so you could put it in the middle of nowhere. So we heard from several manufacturers talking about their micro reactors. Now on page 26 now, we heard from Ultra Safe Nuclear. They stressed a couple of strategic partnerships with Framatome and Urenco for their fuel supply. So there's some links to those companies in that section. And then we heard from Westinghouse. Westinghouse is connected to the AP1000 project that just came online at the Vogel plants. So they have a smaller version called the AP300 that's designed to not be, it's designed to use all the same or all the similar systems that the AP1000 in Vogel uses, but scaled smaller. And the idea is that there's not a lot of technological risk because they're not innovating in any novel ways. They're just kind of scaling down what they already have online. So I thought that was interesting from Westinghouse. And then it goes into fusion reactors. So that wasn't in the statute that we would cover fusion, but it's become a recent news item. So I thought it'd be good to at least touch on it. So there's some explanation about how fusion is different than fission. And we did hear from, for one, we heard from Matt Wald, who was a journalist that covers nuclear energy. He talked about it. We heard Michael Wenzel from the NRC. He touched on that the NRC is going to develop regulations for fusion reactors. We heard from Craig Piercy from the American Nuclear Society. He talked about fusion reactors. The consensus is that it's still decades away, and that the recent news about fusion breakthroughs, they're still not reaching a point where they're getting more energy out of the system than they put in. And we heard from Zap Energy back in September, who's working on a fusion reactor, and they have a novel way that they're doing it. They actually use electricity to sort of slam plasma together to create a fusion event. And then they capture the neutrons released in liquid metal. And then that liquid metal goes to, I guess, would theoretically go to run a steam turbine. So we did hear from Zap Energy. All right, I'll keep going. Anybody else? Is this helpful to kind of run through it? So then we talk about the nuclear fuel supply chain. So fuel and regulation were two big things that are potential hurdles for this advanced nuclear industry. So the fuel supply chain, there was this idea that kept coming up called the chicken and the egg problem. It's sort of like, which came first or which comes first? Is it the consumers of advanced nuclear or the producers of advanced nuclear? So the producers don't want to create a whole bunch of product that no one's going to buy. And the consumers don't want to build their reactors without having fuel to feed the reactors. So there's like a chicken and egg problem. It's probably going to take the federal government to kind of break that deadlock. And one of the issues is this HALEU fuel production. So HALEU stands for high assay, low enriched uranium. So traditional fuel that Seabrook uses is, I think, up to 5% enriched, but the HALEU is between 5 and up to 20% enriched. So and I think for nuclear proliferation, you have to worry about like 90% or higher. So it's still not quite that level of enrichment. But this HALEU is even more energy dense, and a lot of these new reactors will use it. And it allows them to run, I think, up to 8 years without being refueled. So that's, and Seabrook, I think it's 18 months, right? So every 18 months, you have to shut down for maybe 4 weeks or something. Yeah, so these new reactors may be able to run for much longer. And there's recent news about Centrus Energy. They've just come online with their Piketon, Ohio plant. They've just started processing some HALEU. So that's recent news about that. And then on page 30, we get into the TRISO fuel technology. So TRISO takes little poppy seed, like tiny little flakes of uranium and some other materials, and they wrap it into a larger, either like a rod or a ball. And the idea is that it prevents radiation, having an event where radiation can leak out. It's safer, not perfectly safe, of course, but it's safer. So that TRISO fuel technology is used in some of these advanced reactors. And there's a picture of it on page 30. And then we heard, continuing with fuel, we heard from Lightbridge. And Lightbridge is creating their fuel technology. There's a picture of their twisted rods that has TRISO in it. Those rods are, a few feet long. It's operates at a lower temperature. And this may even be an option, I think, for Seabrook, right? That if you guys, this may be able to power like traditional reactors as well. It could be, yeah. And then it talks about disposal. And this idea keeps coming up about recycling slightly used fuel. But there's some questions about whether it's commercially viable to do that or not. But there are some companies looking into doing that. And the idea is that the traditional reactors, they use a very small percentage of the potential energy in the fuel. And that, had it all been buried in Yucca Mountain, miles deep, that in the future, there may be ways to get more energy out of that uranium. And so there's companies working on that. It could be up to like a $10 trillion industry if they crack the nut of recycling used fuel. And then we get into non-electrical applications. So that was in our mandate. And it talks about, so if you have a reactor, most reactors want to run 100% of the time, just crank out electricity. But the rest of the grid has different demands. So demand goes up and down depending on the time of day or the season. And so what do you do with the electricity that is being generated, but the grid doesn't need it? So what do you do with it? And, you don't want to just waste it. You want to use it for something. So there's ideas of using it for hydrogen production. So hydrogen would be a type of type of fuel storage technology. So hydrogen is more like a battery than it is a fuel. So you would use electrolysis to separate the hydrogen and oxygen atoms and store the hydrogen to be used later in combustion or a fuel cell or something like that. The radioactive materials can produce medical isotopes that are useful for diagnosing and even curing diseases. It could be used for desalination projects. So you could take seawater and make drinking water from it. And then there was a lot of talk about industrial heat applications. So a lot of manufacturing processes like metallurgy or, Chris, welcome. I think there's one more. We have one more. Alvin, would you mind? Sorry about that. This came off my home printer, so it was like 2 reams of paper. So Chris, just to catch you up, we approved the minutes from the November meeting. That's at page 100 and back. And now we're just kind of walking through I was just kind of step by step. So we're on page 34, or actually 33. And we're talking about non-electrical applications for nuclear energy. So industrial heat. So there's large scale manufacturing. I think some of them are listed here. The industrial heat can be used for different sectors like manufacturing, chemical processing, food production, metallurgy. It's used for things like drying or melting or smelting or refining or cooking or sterilizing. So traditionally this has been produced, this large scale heat has been produced with fossil fuels or coal, natural gas, and oil. So some of these designs have application for industrial heat. So it would decarbonize these processes. And it gets into that a little bit. It talks about different manufacturers. And then this is on page 34, it gets into data centers, and we even heard about Bitcoin mining. That's you guys probably know that's a favorite subject of mine. So it's chairman's prerogative to connect these two things together. But not just turning energy into like a digital commodity. That's one application for it. But these AI data centers, like we're all familiar with how AI is kind of growing. They're very energy hungry. So a lot of these AI, you've heard of cloud computing with like Google and Microsoft and Amazon. Those very large data centers require, so a computer needs energy to function, right? So if you have a lot of computers, it takes a lot of energy. And a lot of these data centers, they want to be carbon neutral. So they're exploring using nuclear energy to power their data centers. And that was confirmed. I had a conversation with the founder of Nano Technology, and he told me that a lot of these guys are calling him up and asking him. And we'll turn your mic on. Sorry.
There's a lot of AC involved there too, right?
Cooling.
You got to make sure that those server farms are kept at a proper temperature. So there's a lot of energy draw there, not just for the processors themselves, right?
Yeah, that's
It's more of a question than a statement.
that is, I mean, from my understanding, I agree with it. And there's ways you can air cool it or you can liquid cool it.
Right.
And I think there's even talk of using, like, extracting the heat through some kind of liquid and then running like a greenhouse with it. So like reusing it for a different purpose.
Yeah,
But
a lot of those, like 350 megawatts of load, continuous load is what I'm hearing for some of those data centers. That's a lot.
350.
Yep.
Yeah, that is a lot. So I mean, I think that's, we're only going to have more and more computers running and they all require energy. So
Give you an idea, that's about 1/7 of New Hampshire's peak load,
1/7.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
roughly.
And that's just one data center?
Yes.
Amazing.
So think about what we would have to do here to add a data center,
Right.
right?
Yeah, with our high electric market.
It's almost all of the nuclear capacity in New Hampshire. Just
Yeah, it's
about.
1.2 gigawatts, you know. All right, and then it gets into some risks of nuclear technology. So we heard a lot about financial risks to these projects. So it goes into the ways a project can go wrong. And then it talks about safety considerations for the reactors themselves. And there's a lot of concern about, you know, what do you do with the radioactive waste? You know, how long is the half-life of this waste? There's a section on understanding radiation. So I thought it was interesting to just touch on, you know, radiation, the different types of it, and the fact that we get some radiation exposure if we fly in an airplane but there's a lot of discussion about how radiation can be very harmful. And that's something that the public is very aware of. And then it talks about nuclear waste management. So 34 states utilize dry cask facilities, and we saw those at Seabrook. So it's a common convention to store the waste on site. And we saw that some of these designs incorporate that into their design, where they actually store the casks as part of their design, and then after maybe 40 or 50 years, they have a plan to sort of reprocess it, but that's kind of like an ongoing, not reprocess, but store it somewhere. But I think the whole concept of intermediate storage somewhere is politically not feasible currently, right? Yeah. Nobody wants it. Yeah. I was on, I heard it's not related to this, not related to our meetings, but there was a conference. It's in one of our meeting notes, the reference to it, I think from the October meeting. But there was a conference about recycling nuclear fuel. And they were saying that because it's consent-based, that they need one governor somewhere in the country to consent to receiving the waste so that they can set up a recycling plant for it. So apparently not one governor has done that, so. But that it could be potentially be a very large industry. All right, and then it talks about comparing the risks of nuclear with other energy sources on page 37.
So I actually have a question about that.
Yeah.
So is that terawatt? Is that what TW stands for?
Yeah.
So how many terawatts of power do wind versus, and solar do produce versus nuclear? Because I mean, I see they're essentially the same risk factor.
Yeah,
If
it's
you're
sort of,
only creating 1 terawatt in wind and 1,000 in nuclear, could really be a different scale.
that's a good question. It is kind of levelized
Mhm.
towards how many terawatts they
Right.
generate.
So
Well,
without knowing the difference between them, it would kind of be hard to assess the risk.
Measured in a sense that based on density per active air pollution per terawatt.
Right, but you could have 1 death in solar and 100 in nuclear and still have the same per 100. Because you don't know how many terawatts of each are produced.
It's a good question. Is that something we should add to the report?
I don't know, just, that was me reading it.
Yeah.
That's the way my mind works.
I mean, I'm sure we could come up with another representation of that. And then I'll just keep going here. 38, we talk about federal regulatory considerations. So there's this new Part 53 that the NRC is working on that would cover these advanced nuclear reactors. The NRC presentation, they seem very enthusiastic about moving this along, but the bureaucratic inertia is sort of holding it back, right? And then on page 39, we had presentations from different federal programs. So we had a presentation from Chris Lose of the GAIN program, and GAIN stands for Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. And so he presented on the voucher system that's part of the GAIN program. So that could be, they have vouchers valued up to $500,000 with a 20% cost share. And there's different details in that section, but that could be a resource for our state. And then we heard from Julie Kazaraki from the DOE Loan Programs Office. And her presentation was pretty dense with information. So I'll just pause here. On the top of page 40, she talked about the cost ranges. I went back through all of our old minutes, and I wasn't able to get like a consistent, chart of all the different cost estimates from the different manufacturers. And I sent out a survey. This may be an addendum to our report at some point, but see if I can pull it up here. I've only gotten 4 responses. And I don't know why it's not working. It was just on, wasn't it? Could someone push the button on the remote there for the TV? The TV was on, now it's not on, so. There we go. It must have went to sleep. That's my screen, yeah. I just wanted to show you, I sent out a survey to the different manufacturers. I've received some responses. Hopefully this will come up here. Yeah. Sure, yeah, welcome. This will just be a minute. And actually, it probably won't be on the YouTube, so. Everybody see that? So this is a survey. We're still compiling results. So I got another response today, it looks like. So I have 5 responses. This is not in the report because it's not, we didn't get responses in time. And there's some I still have to track down, but basically, you know, who they are, what stage is their current design? Is it less than 50, approximately 60, around 90, fully complete? How do you anticipate, how long do you anticipate it will take to commence construction after the design phase is complete? And there's different date ranges. Do you have plans to build a pilot plant for your project, demonstration project? How do pilot plants contribute to the success of scaling up to a commercial unit? Significantly, moderate, minimal, that kind of responses. If applicable, have you secured a site or partners for the demonstration project? Yes. And then there's various yes, maybe, no, but that kind of thing. Engagement with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. How would you describe your interaction with the NRC in preparing for filing a license application? Highly interactive, moderately interactive, limited interaction. We have not yet interacted. What type of feedback or questions have you received from the NRC about your design? Detailed, general questions about safety and regulations. We have not received feedback or questions. And then when do you expect to have your first non-nuclear construction permit from the NRC? When do you expect to have your first nuclear construction permit approved by the NRC? How suitable is their design to New Hampshire? And these are just, it aligns with the state's energy needs and so forth. Range in dollars. So there's the question that I asked, range in dollars per megawatt hour. And then any additional information. So just briefly here, I'll click on the responses. I'll go to that question. So we can compile this as sort of like an addendum if we get complete information. But I did want to look at the range here in megawatt hours. So I've only gotten 2 responses, and they range between 80 and 120. And then one response is $200 per megawatt hour. So I couldn't tell you without digging into it who those responses came from, but so going back to page 40, the top of the page there, Julie Kazaraki gave us an approximate cost range. So in 2023 dollars, she says $66 to $109 per megawatt hour. And then she says by 2050, they expect that to go down to $58 to $79 per megawatt hour. So this response here, the 80 to 120, is a little bit more in line with what Julie said, but a little higher. So we talked about this at our last meeting. That's the best response I could give you, but Julie's presentation had a lot of that information in it. So we capture it here on page 40. And they expect they need approximately 200 gigawatts of new nuclear generation if the US is going to transition away from carbon. So that's a pretty big number for new generation. And then we heard from Dr. Billy Valderrama from the from the Office of Nuclear Energy from the DOE. And he kind of affirmed some of the other things that were said prior. And I'm looking at the bottom of page 40 here. He also referenced the NuScale power module in Idaho in his presentation. And I added a little caveat there at the very end where it says no longer happening. And then on page 41, he talks about this Marvel project. It's a 100 kilowatt micro reactor. It's going to be deployed at the Idaho National Laboratory by the end of 2024. And I covered that back on page, let's see, page 13. There was a section about that Marvel project. And then he talks about the 4 main priorities of the Office of Nuclear Energy. So they want to maintain the existing reactor fleet, They want to deploy new advanced reactors. They want to ensure secure nuclear fuel supply chain. And they want to expand international cooperation. And he mentioned the Advanced Nuclear State Collaborative. And I put a note to myself that I should have expanded that, some detail on that, but that would be an interesting thing to pursue. And then the next section, this is pretty much the same as our interim report, the recent federal policy initiatives. So it talks about some different federal legislation that is related to advanced nuclear. So we have the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act. And that was signed into law by President Trump in 2019. We have the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021. That had some it had some provisions for nuclear energy within its total. 2.5 billion is earmarked for developing advanced nuclear reactor technologies. And I'm over on page 42 now. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 had some aspects that applied to advanced nuclear. And then the Chips and Science Act of 2022 also had some provisions for nuclear. So it authorized $390 million to establish up to 4 new research reactors and nuclear science and engineering facilities. Then we have the International Nuclear Energy Act of 2023. And then we have the Strategic Nuclear Infrastructure Act. I don't know if that one was signed into law. And then continuing, we had a Recoup American Nuclear Global Leadership Act. And then accelerating deployment of versatile advanced nuclear for clean energy, the ADVANCE Act. And that was a bipartisan group of senators. They introduced the bill in March 2023. It passed the U.S. Senate as part of the NDAA on July 27th, 2023. And then we have some topic about there's organized opposition to nuclear that is long-standing in our area. And we have a representative from Beyond Nuclear here, is that right? You work for Beyond Nuclear? Okay. You're friends with Paul Gunter. Okay. That's I just made the assumption. And so it talks about, I'm sorry, go ahead. That you're friends? Okay, all right.
He's also one of my constituents.
Oh, excellent. Oh, very good.
Actually, I have 2 constituents because Alvin is too.
Oh, excellent. Your mutual constituents. All right, so it talks a little bit about the Clamshell Alliance that we have heard so much about. They were formed in 1976, and they opposed the construction of Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant. There was an event where a large protest with civil disobedience, and I think something like 1,400 activists were arrested. Does that sound right? 15, okay. 14, 15.
More importantly, they frequently made me late for Little League games.
Oh yeah, you had to go through the. And then they were ultimately unsuccessful in stopping Seabrook totally, but there was only one reactor developed, I think partly because of financial reasons, but some because of opposition. Right? And then there's the C10 Research and Education Foundation. That's funded mainly by Massachusetts, if I understand correctly. The C10, they operate radiological monitoring network around Seabrook. So they get activated if something goes wrong, right? At Seabrook. Okay, all right. I won't put you on the spot. And then it talks about Beyond Nuclear, which we've had Paul Gunter from Beyond Nuclear has participated in many of our meetings. And they're out at Tacoma Park, Maryland. And so they're looking to if I understand it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they want renewable energy and they don't want nuclear, right? Is that kind of the, yeah. So they're kind of, I don't want to say anti-nuclear, but they would rather nuclear not proceed. Okay, all right, so anti-nuclear would be accurate. But they focus on policy and advocacy. So they're active in our state as well. All right, and then we move on to, there needs to be, if this is going to proceed further, public engagement is important. And I know, how do we do that? How do we engage publicly in this area? And there's a few ideas in those paragraphs there. And then just, I probably have another 10 minutes and then I'll be wrapped up. Sorry to put you to sleep. We heard from ISO New England. They put on a presentation to us, and it was Eric Johnson presented to us in October. He talked a lot about the changing energy mix in the region. It sounds like a lot of our surrounding states, our neighbor states, are pushing a lot of green energy policy on ISO New England. They're neutral. They don't take a position, but they do follow what states tell them to do. And so if New Hampshire has a different idea, we have to be a little more assertive with ISO New England to kind of counterbalance what our neighboring states are doing. You know, if our policies are different, and they seem to be, I think I heard our consumer advocate on TV call us the redheaded stepchild of ISO New England or something, because our state thinks differently than other states. Don't quote me on that, but he said something like that. But Eric Johnson went into, you know, how our energy grid is transitioning, the challenges of renewable, because it's renewable just tends to be intermittent, and it, you know, in the wintertime, we can't have the power go out because people might freeze to death, and that would be not a good situation. So he talks about, you know, the need for base load power. He says, he talked about the interconnection queue. He gave us kind of like an overview of how interconnection, how the new ones come online. And he said that there's about 38,000 megawatts of predominantly renewable energy working its way through that interconnection queue process. That's regionally. So that was an interesting thing. And then, let's see. So their assumption, ISO New England's assumption, is that no new nuclear plants will be constructed in the region over the next 40 years. So that's their assumption that they're operating on. So if this advanced nuclear industry gets off the ground, that assumption would need to change, right? So, so it was kind of good to connect with ISO New England on this topic. And then we had, I mentioned our consumer advocate, we had Donald Crease. He presented back in our May meeting. He reminded us, he said people think that he's anti-nuclear, but that's not the case. And early in his career, he was involved with the Vermont Yankee plant. He was, I think, he was defending the plant against aggressive actions by the state of Vermont. And he said he thought that was wrong, that the state told the plant that it had to shut down. So that was interesting. But he said in his position, he needs to be technology neutral. Well, and that our state in general is technology neutral. He said adding nuclear to renewable standards could be an option. But he said his role as consumer advocate, he has to consider who bears the cost of any potential new nuclear generation. So he's very, he guards the ratepayer from having additional burdens and risks put on them. So, and that would rule out any kind of large scale subsidies by the state. You know, he would be likely opposed to that. All right. So the last couple sections, we have key findings. I think we're going to slow down a little bit just because I think these deserve a little extra attention. The key findings, and then the potential state policy options. So let's, it's only a page and a half, but let's go through one at a time and see if we want to cross off anything or expand anything, because I think this will be the section that people kind of flip to. And then after that, we just have the conclusion, which is basically a summary of everything we just talked about. So you want to take a minute just to read those? Let's start with the summary of key findings and just put your thinking caps on and see if there's anything missing.
You wanna read first and then?
Yeah, do you want me to read it?
Talk about it now as we're reading.
You want to read it? You want me to read it out loud, or do you want to just read it?
No,
Yeah.
I'm
However you want to do it. Yeah. Oh, well, let's go through them one at a time then. You want to read them?
sure.
Okay.
I guess what I had something to add to the first one, right, to
Okay.
advanced nuclear, crucial role of advanced nuclear and carbon reduction. Advanced nuclear technology is essential for the goal of net carbon emissions to limit its use could significantly escalate the cost of carbon reduction efforts. I would argue that it's not just about cost, it's infeasible without it.
Yeah,
Achieving net zero is a pipe dream without
without nuclear.
expanding.
Okay. So that came from one of our presentations. They were talking about, I think it was Julie Kozorowski's presentation. She was saying, like, if nuclear is not part of the mix, then the costs just go through the roof. But you're right, it approaches impossibility. So you want to make that statement a little stronger?
I would just, or question the feasibility or something like that.
Okay.
Just point out that it's not just about cost, but it's also about. Yeah,
Well, you could just simply add, limiting its use could significantly escalate the cost of carbon reduction efforts and feasibility with current technologies.
And feasibility with limiting its use could significantly escalate the cost of carbon reduction efforts, potentially making it infeasible
With current technology or something.
with current
Right.
technologies. All right.
there's a square peg in the round hole, which you feel like to discuss.
Okay. I'm going to just write this in my notes and then come back to it. All right, so, number 2.
Nuclear energy's reliability and efficiency. The inherent reliability and efficiency of nuclear power, particularly in terms of grid stability and frequency response, are key strengths.
It's kind of a generic statement, but
Do we want to add? So you mentioned earlier about, new reactor technology has the ability to load follow, right?
Yeah.
Well, generally what we have in this country can't load follow, right? Seabrook can't load follow. It's a baseload plant. They fire it up, it runs, and that's, unless I'm wrong, but I know you can
Yeah.
move a little bit, but
Yeah, I think Seabrook probably could load follow. I think economically it's not viable the way that they sell now.
okay.
and it
That's
would
my
it
understanding.
could put like additional stresses on the whole system, right? If you change the,
Yeah, I thought the fuel gets stressed.
could you put your mic on?
So I believe that the fuel is what gets stressed if
The
you try to
fuel gets
if
Yeah.
you try to load follow.
I don't think it's an
Uh,
issue with the fuel. It's purely, I think it's purely economics, is my understanding of it. Because everything is designed to run for 18 months, so they put a certain amount of fuel in. So, there are challenges with moving the plant up and down, but I think it could be done.
It's technically
Technically
feasible.
possible. I think economically it's not.
Okay. Did you want to make a change to number 2?
Well, given that, I don't know, maybe not.
So it talks about grid stability. That's sort of the main point there, is that
Right, yeah.
that's an important feature that we all depend on, right?
Yep.
Okay with number 2?
Number 3, progress in nuclear fuel recycling. The development and implementation of spent nuclear fuel recycling methods are important steps forward in nuclear waste management.
So I have notes to myself after I read it again, talking, like adding something about economic viability and avoiding proliferation risk. So I think adding those two things to that one would round it out.
Works for.
Is that all right? All right.
Number 4, innovation in nuclear business models. The emergence of innovative business models for advanced nuclear technologies is a notable trend, such as the power as a service model.
So several of these manufacturers talked about they would continue to own the plant and they would basically sell the power to customers. So they would be responsible for any maintenance and ultimate decommissioning of it. It seems very ambitious, but that's what several of them said.
I don't see any need to change it.
It's good to go. Okay.
Number 5, modernizing nuclear licensing processes. Efforts are underway to update and streamline the nuclear reactor licensing process, focusing on achieving a balance between flexibility and predictability.
Should we say something in there about still ensuring safety and all of that, that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission pointed out?
Yeah, while ensuring safety. Yeah, I agree with that. That's really the NRC's main job, right?
So maybe focusing on achieving a balance between flexibility, safety, and predictability, or something like that, just to keep it simple. Can you balance 3 things?
Yeah, that's right. The three-body problem. All right, I'll add safety in there between flexibility and predictability.
Number 6, learnings from advanced nuclear projects. Key lessons include the importance of complete design development before construction, collaboration with experienced contractors, and ensuring a robust supply chain.
So we had, was it Westinghouse? They talked a lot about lessons learned from the Vogel plant because that went way over budget and it was eventually successful, but in economic terms, it was, you know, big cost overruns. And so they said a little bit. I mean, if you average it out over 80 years, maybe it's not so much, but
Yeah, over the life of the plant, it's going to be valuable, but from a net present value basis, it's probably not.
Yeah. But they talked a lot about their some of their partners in that project were not as experienced as they maybe could have been. And that's the whole, it's kind of a separate chicken and an egg thing, is that you need a lot of high skilled labor to build these projects. They're not being built for decades. And so how do you kind of start up that whole experience, you know, cycle?
I don't know if this is where you'd want to put it, but didn't they talk about if you're the first of its kind and you make first of a kind of 20 different projects, you're not going to save money, but you have to find one that and go with it, kind of thing. I don't know if this
Right.
is where you want it, but or if you talked
So,
about
yeah,
that
we
somewhere
could- we
else.
could put that there. So like achieving nth of a kind, I think is the term they would use, right? Yeah. So you get efficiencies, economies of scale if you're like, if you've ever put together an IKEA bookshelf or done something first of a kind in your house, you know, you like the first time takes you 5 hours and you do it wrong, but the second time you do it, you can do it like that, right?
I think that might fit under number 8 too, for cost competitiveness or nth of a kind.
Okay, yeah, actually, let's put it there. Does that sound right?
7, advanced reactors combining novel technologies. Innovative reactor designs are being developed that combine high temperature operations, thermal energy storage with enhanced fuel stability and safety. You good?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's a generic statement, but
Yep. 8, goal for cost competitiveness with fossil fuels. There's an industry-wide goal to make advanced nuclear reactors cost competitive with fossil fuel power plants without relying on subsidies.
so we heard that from several manufacturers. I'm sure they'd all love subsidies if they could get them, but we sort of said that we're not friendly to subsidies. So I think some of them may have tailored their presentation to us, you know? So that last part of without relying on subsidies. I think that that reflects at least several of the presentations that we heard. Everybody good with that one?
Number 9, target for commercial deployment by 2030. Many in the industry aim to achieve commercial deployment of advanced reactor technologies by 2030 or earlier. I think that reflects the Kemmerer plant, right? I think they're,
That's one, I think they're 2028.
I know the coal plant's gonna retire in 25.
Let's see.
2030, I think is a good,
That's TerraPower. That's on page 14. It's slated for retirement in 2025. It doesn't have a date for when they're coming online.
I think 2030 reflects a lot of what we've heard.
Most of them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard some say late 2020s, but we know how these dates tend to slip, right? So, all right.
Number 10, emphasis on high efficiency electricity generation. Advanced reactors are being designed to maximize electricity generation efficiency.
So
Yeah, what do
I-
we
you
mean
kinda
by
have
that? Is
to
that like a heat, is that a heat rate thing? Is that like a,
So getting more energy out of the fuel than potentially some of the older plants do. And Matt, I don't know if you want to expand on that, but
Yeah, so like the gas plants that run at a higher temperature can get more fuel out or more energy out. My personal opinion is it might dilute kind of the rest of the findings. My recommendation would be to take it out.
I agree.
take it out. All right.
Could it be changed to say that modular and smaller reactors allow for localized energy generation, which will improve efficiency? Because a lot of it's lost in the lines, right?
It's not, but it's not about the line. I don't think
It
you're
isn't.
getting at, it's not about transmission line losses here. It's about
It's
the
about-
efficiency of the reactor or the, in a case of a gas plant, the thermal,
Right. Extracting is more energy out of the fuel
the,
than,
the energy lost in the process.
right, right,
Conversion of the energy to electricity and stuff that you don't have to throw away.
right, exactly.
That's,
So should we cross it
I
out?
would, in my opinion, I would get rid of it because you're opening up discussions to, like I said, about heat rates, right? Like the most efficient natural gas plants are like 60% efficient.
Okay.
You know? Huh?
The codex.
So.
Alright.
No, some of the GE turbines in the.
All right. So
that's
I'm
actually
gonna
60%
scratch number 10.
efficient.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Almost.
You want to go to 11?
11, okay, sorry, yeah, I got lost. 11, strategic approaches to reactor development. The strategic development approach prioritizing rapid learning and innovation is being adopted across the industry.
Again, very generic.
Yep, I think that works.
Works.
And number 12, commitment to commercializing advanced nuclear. There's a broad commitment to the commercialization of advanced nuclear technologies, signaling a potential transformation in the energy sector. And the other thing I would say, do we want to add like partnering with, large energy consumers? Because we know, if you talked about with the data centers, they're looking, that is something they're actively looking into, large industrial consumers looking at advanced reactor technology. Or do you think that's already covered?
I think that might be its own. What if we replace number 10 with that thought, where large data centers are looking?
I would just put like large industrial users or heavy or high load or, I don't know, however you want to phrase it, but big energy consumers are looking at advanced nuclear because like a lot of them want to be carbon neutral.
Okay.
Like the new core, new scale MOU is an example of that. I don't know where that's going to end up now, but,
All right.
Would you want to include broad bipartisan commitment? Because it seems like both sides are pushing legislation that is assisting in this, or is that not what your point was in 12?
I think it makes it political at that point. I don't think we want to.
We could add something about that back in the section that talks about the different legislation.
Yeah.
Cause I'll go through and see who the sponsors are, but I'm pretty sure there's the Inflation Reduction Act was
Yeah.
pretty much the Biden administration, but it was
Right.
bipartisan. I could put, is that all right, putting it there? If it's not there already, let me just refresh my memory here.
So are you referring in 12 to between the reactor producers
You
and
okay with those?
the energy
Dan?
users? Is that
Okay.
what you're trying to get to?
Yeah, that's a good point. Hey, Keith?
Yeah.
On 12, maybe change it from broad commitment to broad interest,
Okay,
because I'm not sure that there actually has been any financial commitments made.
okay.
Yeah.
So, it was back on page. I just had it here. It's page 41, recent federal policy initiatives. I'll add the word bipartisan in there. Is that all right?
Mhm.
And I'll find a good spot for it. And what I'll do is I'll track changes on the Word document. I'll update based on what we discussed here. I'll circulate the track changes so you can see exactly what's different. And then we'll release it after that. Does that sound all right? And if you have, Mark, if you have suggested language, we'll throw that in there for any of these. So last I heard was we'll change commitment to interest on number 12.
Yeah.
I had a couple other items that, just for general consideration. So one would be, we had a lot of talk of deregulated versus regulated markets and how most likely any new nuclear is going to be in a regulated market, at least at the beginning. Is that worth including in this section? Or?
It's in one of the, in this section. So it's covered in the consumer advocates section. And then in the most recent, I want to say it was Moltex's presentation, not Moltex, Ultra Safe Nuclear. They mentioned, trying to figure out where it is in the document. They mentioned that, I'll have to search for it. He mentioned that most likely it'll be in a vertically integrated market first, right?
Yeah. That's, I'm just wondering if you're saying, okay, well, the customer for this report, if you said, okay, well, what do I want them to take away? One of the things is,
Okay.
most likely you're not going to get a new nuclear plant in a deregulated market by the 2030s. You're going to be much later. You're going to be nth of a kind versus first of a kind. Once there's more certainty and, utilities understand what that cost looks like.
Yeah, unless it's privately funded, right?
Yeah.
If I understand, David, like if we had approval for a micro reactor, say, let's say it's commercially available, you could put one on your industrial site somewhere in New Hampshire, as long as it was approved by, like, it would just be a funding, an issue of like capital at that point, right? Citing.
There's no prohibition. I think I don't want to speak for you, but I think what you're asking is there's no prohibition on an industrial consumer entering into a PPA with a generator.
Correct.
Right.
So, that's a possibility, but it's kind of, low probability, right? All right, we'll put something about the likelihood of first of a kind going into a regulated market as opposed to,
Yeah, I don't feel super strongly about it, so if the rest of the commission
Okay.
doesn't think it belongs there, I'm fine. It just seemed to me that it might be relevant.
we had a few people make that point.
You're seeing it with almost everything right now, right? Like So I think that's fair. I mean, even offshore wind, utility scale solar, none of those are getting built on market revenue. They're all getting built in, PPAs, state supported contracts.
Okay.
So I think that's a fair statement to make.
All right, I'll draft something up when I can sit and think about it, and then, but I'll go back through and see what different comments were made. I think Representative Harrington couldn't be here today. He has some thoughts on that. So, and he's brought up that point a few times. I'll go back and look exactly what he said. All right, any other items and the key findings? We'll update those. All right, so before we get to the conclusion, we'll look at potential state policy options. Mark, you want to read through those?
Yeah, I'll keep going.
Okay.
Enact legislation for clean nuclear energy. Designate nuclear as a clean technology under renewable portfolio standards and other state clean energy programs, aligning with New Hampshire Department of Energy's 2021 State Energy Strategy on page 56.
So there's a link in the document that goes to their energy strategy. If you want, I can pull up what they said.
These aren't necessarily recommendations from us, right, Keith? We're just
They're
throwing out,
options. Yeah,
some options that
right.
policymakers could take a look at.
Exactly right. I mean, that's really all we can do anyway, right?
We're not making any solid recommendations. Okay, this is our preferred path forward.
Well, let's go through the whole list and see. I don't think we're kind of limited in what we can do. And actually, there's a few pieces of legislation that match up to a couple of these that I can talk about.
Okay.
But
Right. 2, feasibility studies for advanced reactor sites. Conduct studies to identify suitable sites for advanced reactors, focusing on potential applications in end users like industrial facilities or retiring coal and biomass plants.
yeah, so the feasibility studies could be done by maybe the Department of Energy, or we talked about Dartmouth is potentially going to look at some of these things. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, David. Like, is number 2 a good recommendation? Okay.
And my concern would be if you're getting utilities involved with, load capabilities and what they might need to do to upgrade their systems. Is that going to be costly to them, time consuming to them? Or do you think it can be done without involving I guess that's my question. Do you think that something like this could be done without involving utilities, for feasibility studies and that sort of thing? Because that's something that would have to probably be approved by the PUC.
So some of these federal programs, like retiring coal plants, we have one coal plant in our state. They're looking for that specific situation, and they're
Coal
willing
and
to
nuclear stuff, right?
the coal nuclear transition. They're willing to help out with that. So we'd have to investigate to see exactly what resources are available,
Okay.
but that may be one option.
And knowing that works for me.
Is that all right? Okay.
Financial incentives for nuclear projects. Identify potential federal financial support through grants, loans, and tax credits to facilitate advanced reactor demonstrations and deployments while being mindful of potential political resistance in New Hampshire.
So this is the free federal money tree, like I guess it's something that we could pursue potentially. I know we're stingy except for when the federal government's going to give us stuff. Seems to be the ethos here.
So would that be a state policy option then?
Well, policy could be, departments pursuing it, right?
Yes,
The executive branch could pursue it.
seems like they would.
That's a good question, actually.
I mean, it seems like they would be doing it. Isn't that more of a private sector initiative, more than a state?
I mean, I could see
Couldn't it
it
be through
would-
like a state university or something like that? If it was like the GAIN program specifically is for research, so if it was like Dartmouth or UNH or something like that, I don't, I'm out of my depth of knowledge, but I would think potentially it could be.
Yeah, I mean, like similar to you, it sounds good what you're saying. Do we want to modify what we're saying in that?
Instead of identify, then it maybe utilize potential federal financial support, maybe? I don't know.
Well, identifying would be the
What
first step,
we're
right?
trying to
Yeah,
is to go find that information.
Right,
That's really what the effort to find it.
right. Like drill down in that one area. Right?
I don't have a problem with keeping it, but I understand what Senator Pearl's getting at.
Maybe you could combine that with number 7, with your nuclear development coordinator. That could be a
So
duty of his.
number 7, when we get to it, that has been in state statute for
That's right.
decades. And I had someone in the governor's office looked into it for me, and it hasn't been filled since like 2007, the position. And the person that was in it last passed away, so we can't even talk to him.
They've never.
Yeah, so I don't know if David's seen my bill yet.
I'm allowed to say.
You're not allowed to say. It hasn't been released yet, but there's a bill to sort of like update that section and put it under the Department of Energy, which I think would be a good home for it. And it would, so the coordinator was supposed to inform the governor and the executive council like twice a year for going back to the 50s, I think. And that hasn't been done. So I think if I recall correctly, I put in like a 5-year cycle where it would be, you know,
Some of this may.
sure. You're right. So then my other, so when I present the bill, I'm going to say, if you don't want to do this, then repeal the statute, because nothing bothers me more than statutes that aren't followed. Right? Like, so anyway, it's a discussion I'm sure we'll have. But that's number 7, right? That's what that's related to. So you were saying combine those two?
Well, if you're gonna have, you know, a state nuclear development coordinator, wouldn't one of his duties to be to seek out and find what available potential grants are there, things of that nature? That kind of be a task of his more than a state policy.
So I'd have to go look at what the statute actually says.
I mean,
Mhm.
I'm okay, you can lead this here, I just,
Do you want to put it, can I move it after that one? So if I move 3 to like number 8, and then kind of refer back to the previous one? So there's sort of,
maybe even combine them, make it part of it. I don't, Keith, I'm okay either.
yeah, I'm just trying to think like,
I'm just thinking more of it, of what the state's role is in doing this.
I guess I kind of want to keep it, but
That's fine, I'm okay
yeah.
with it.
It's sort of like a,
I don't have any hard objection to it or anything. So.
it's,
I raised the
sort of,
question, we had the conversation.
okay. But I'll move it until after 7, and that way it's sort of, and I'll
Reorder it.
connect them up, because they do seem related. I just kind of see that as like, if this is going to happen, that's going to be a piece of it, right? Like,
Mhm.
Number 4, workforce development and public awareness. Implement workforce training programs and public awareness campaigns to foster talent pipelines and increase public understanding of nuclear technology. You would probably have the biggest input on this one.
Yeah, I think, you know, industry-wide, whether it's utilities or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, there's a talent shortage out there for people with engineering degrees or backgrounds in this. And because most of the plants were built in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the workforce that have worked for 30 plus years are retiring. So it's definitely something that if this industry is going to grow, there's a shortage of talent for sure.
yeah.
Do you see there being issues down the road with just having the labor to support the plant itself? operationally down, or is that not something you're concerned about right now?
No, I would say like craft workers, like electricians, mechanics and stuff, we have those people. It's more, engineers and, the people that work in the control room typically have engineering degrees or they come out of the nuclear navy. But yeah, the industry's struggling for talent.
So we're good with that one?
Number 5, streamline licensing and permitting processes. Simplify and expedite advanced reactors licensing and permitting processes, reducing regulatory delays.
Is the state policy or is that more of a federal policy?
I was gonna say, what's the overlap there?
Yeah.
Well, so the state, the state has its own atomic energy statutes, right? They're tied to the federal statutes. So I don't know, David, do you have any thoughts on, is that,
From a licensing perspective, that's a federal thing, I think, right? I mean, the state's not gonna license a facility, does it? Or does it?
I don't think it licenses a facility, but there is like, the Department of Environmental Services, or there's other stuff that the state does interface with nuclear facilities on.
you mentioned siting, is that?
Would have to go through the same evaluation.
But that'd be more permitting, right? Not licensing per se, or do you think there's overlap?
It's a siting slash.
Yeah.
Whether the federal license trumps siting, right?
Hey, David, would you mind just turning your mic on and just repeating what you said? Just because it's being streamed, that's all.
So I would have to go back and check, but I do think they would have to go through the siting process with the site evaluation committee. Right? And that process is constantly being streamlined.
So some of these recommendations came from our discussions, but also, I'm just gonna jump ahead to, let's see. Where is it?
While you're looking, I'll just say this. I don't see any problem with number 5, whether we really have a lot of state licensing control or if it's more permitting. I don't think the statement is wrong. I think
Okay.
it's fine.
Got it.
We'd want to streamline whatever involvement we have.
Works for me.
Maybe it's not in my copy. Do you guys have one that talks about? Can I see your copy of something? The NEI, what I'm trying to find, the NEI, there it is, number 9. Why can't I see that on mine? Oh, it is on mine. Mine is from an old toner cartridge. You guys got the new toner cartridge. So the NEI has a whole list of recommendations for policy, and some of these came from those suggestions. And there's a link in the digital copy that goes to their document. It has a whole bunch of different recommendations. That's what I wanted to just point out, that streamlining, I believe, is from their recommendations. Number 6.
Invest in nuclear supply chain capabilities. Promote public and private investments in the nuclear supply chain, including component manufacturing.
So we probably want to scratch out public, or and then maybe a different word besides promote. Encourage. I mean, the governor does ribbon cuttings all the time, right? Like, there's promotion of private industry by the state. So you want to say encourage, take out the word public? Is that okay with you?
Take
Darrell?
out public.
Sorry.
So number 6, we're going to change promote to encourage. and then scratch public investments.
Encourage private investments in the nuclear supply chains, including component. Yeah, because I don't know that we're gonna make any public investment as a state into it. I would agree with it.
Yeah, so I mean, public could be the federal government, and we know that this is a national security, there's national security implications for
That's true.
building up but it's not a state policy, right?
I guess there'd be no issue with leaving public in that case. We could encourage it with a resolution or something if we chose
We can
to.
encourage it.
If you change to promote, encourage, whatever, either.
I could add the word federal in there, just to,
I mean, it goes back to federal incentives, right? If there's gonna be
Yeah.
federal incentives to, expand rail or port or, whatever for a manufacturing facility, the state's probably not gonna say no to it, right? So,
Now, again, we gotta remember, these are just options.
right.
right,
It's an option that we could encourage it. So I don't, we're not, we're not saying the state should do this. We're just saying the state could encourage.
or, look out for opportunities to
Mhm.
do it, right? All right,
However you wanna word that's okay with me.
okay.
Number 7, appoint a state nuclear development coordinator. Revive the coordinator of atomic development activities position from a 1955 state statute to advise and manage pro-nuclear policies and initiatives guiding the legislature, executive council, and government.
Yeah, I could pull up that statute if you guys want. I mean, it's one of the few things that we sort of uncovered in our, it's long been forgotten about, I believe. The fact that it's in our statutes, but why isn't it coming up? I think I have, turn this off here. So here it is, coordination of studies. I think it's the one I. The governor and council shall appoint the head of one of the state departments concerned as advisor to the governor with respect to atomic industrial development within the state. As coordinator of the development and regulatory activities of the state government relating to the industrial and commercial uses of atomic energy. As a deputy of the governor in matters relating to atomic energy, including participation in the activities of any committee formed by the New England states. To represent their interest in such matters and also cooperation with other states and with the government of the United States, the department head so appointed shall have the additional title of coordinator of atomic development activities. And then there's a few responsibilities there. So that's what that's related to. And if, I think it's just good to have a discussion about it, right? It's in the statutes. Let's update it or eliminate it, right? Like, any thoughts on that?
I'm fine.
All right. Number 8.
Legislation to update atomic energy statutes. Draft and propose legislation to update the state's atomic energy statutes, incorporating the federal definition of advanced nuclear.
Okay, so I have a bill submitted. I think you're a co-sponsor on it.
Am I?
So we heard from one of the, it could have been NEI. I think it was NEI. They suggested that there's a federal definition of advanced nuclear. I don't know if I could pull it up off the tip of my fingers, but it has a whole list of advanced nuclear. And to tie our state statutes to that definition, putting it in our state statutes so that there's an anchor point. So for like any future legislation, it's part of our statutes. So in that update, there's a minor refresh to our statutes, and that's included in that. Bill hasn't been released yet, but.
Number 9, consult state policy suggestions by NEI, Nuclear Energy Institute, sorry. NEI compiles reports on potential state policy options for states to support nuclear energy.
Yeah, so just real quick, there's a link in the document that goes to that. And, we hear legislators talking about promoting nuclear, and this would be a good place for them to look in this document here. See if I can know how to make it full screen. But it talks about policy options. And again, they're not all. So state climate and carbon reduction policy, state energy policy, energy planning, okay. Capital markets, transmission infrastructure. So it's a 9-page document that's fairly recent. This points people to that document, basically.
Perfect. Number 10, reevaluate New Hampshire's participation in the NRC agreement state program. The NRC assists states in establishing programs to assume regulatory authority under the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, allowing states to license and regulate various materials. This assistance includes reviewing requests for agreements, conducting training and evaluation, and coordinating event reporting with agreement states. Currently, 39 states have such agreements, including New Hampshire.
So reevaluate, I don't know if there's much discussion about this in the Department of Energy or in the PUC. I mean, does this ever come up? See if I can pull it up here. So this goes to the NRC's website. They have a page about New Hampshire. There's a link in the electronic document that goes to this. And it has all information about. So Augustinus Onge, is that currently a person in the Department of, he's the administrator of Radiological Health Section Department?
Public health? I can't read it from here. Is that public health?
Let's see if I can make it bigger.
Is that public health? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, this is the information on, there it is.
Yeah, it's Department of Public Health, the Health and Human Services. I don't know.
I know Robert Buxton is correct. Sure.
Because I'm not sure what Michelle Roberge title is.
And here's a link to this is the agreement that our state has signed with the NRC. So the idea is maybe we need to go back and, refamiliarize ourselves with this. Is that a good idea? Okay. And, maybe there's resources through those relationships, right, that we could utilize.
Number 11, urge the NRC to review and approve licenses. State legislature could pass resolutions urging the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to not delay license approvals for advanced nuclear projects.
So this would be, just one of those House resolutions that go into the circular file somewhere in DC, but it could, raise awareness about it. You want to expand that at all?
No.
No.
Number 12, urge ISO New England to seek advanced nuclear proposals. While ISO New England remains neutral on energy generation, it does take direction from member state policy cues.
So this was Dick Barry's suggestion. Dick, I served on the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee when he was the chairman, and he's very knowledgeable about this stuff. His thought was, why don't we tell ISO New England to pursue this stuff? And I don't know if we can do that or not, but
I mean, you could put it in here, but there's no mechanism for them to push one technology really over another. They approve tariffs and manage markets. I mean, that's right.
So our neighboring states are pushing carbon, net zero policy, right? And we're sort of getting muscled around by those other markets. I guess if we said net zero has to include nuclear, advanced nuclear, and put that into the conversation regionally, is there a way to do that? See what I mean?
Aren't the other states pushing it through subsidies to the solar and wind, which makes their economics on ISO New England look better? So
Probably, yeah.
through that mechanism, not necessarily through the policy itself.
I mean, that's how they're doing it. Right? That's what I said earlier. Is that none of the wind farms that have been built in Maine, even the ones in New Hampshire, are relying on PPAs. And all the offshore wind contracts, I think between two developers, they just paid $100 million in penalties to get out of the agreements.
Wow.
because the finances don't work anymore. So it's all out of market, as far as what's getting developed right now on a large scale.
Okay.
If anybody sees anything differently, let me
Anybody
know,
thoughts on
but
that?
that's all I see.
Yeah, I'll add, I think, I agree. I think the overarching encouragement to ISO New England could still happen. We could write letters and we could encourage them to consider the New Hampshire position, which is different, I think, than the other states. But I also agree that ultimately it's a PPA. Somebody has to pay for the technology. So both things are true.
Okay. Would you modify that or eliminate it, that number 11 or 12, I'm sorry?
Yeah, I mean, I'd keep it. I mean, I think encouraging ISO New England is different than getting a result from ISO New England. So letting them know what our state policy is and the direction we're going, they want to please us. And so they'll be interested in our position. But it's also true that they respond to PPAs and that's how they do business.
Okay.
So I think both things are true. I would leave it in there.
Leave it in? Okay. And any caveats? I mean, I put, they're neutral and they take direction from member state policy.
No, that's true.
It's true. Yeah.
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 So, I mean, there may be ways to assert, if our policy direction is different than our surrounding states, if we just a little more assertive with it, just to make sure that our interests are tracking,
I
right?
think that's right.
Okay. Last one.
Number 13, declare nuclear energy in the state's national interest. State legislature can pass resolutions to declare nuclear energy to be in the state and national interest.
Again, another resolution, but I don't know what else.
You guys are the legislators. If you
Yeah.
want to go for it.
Do you have, there's two resolution
Refer to the
items in there. Do you have any thoughts on those?
13?
13 and what was the other one? 11 and 13 are kind of related. Maybe I'll put those next to each other.
Well, we certainly can, if that's what we decide that. We can certainly create resolutions if that we decide that's the interest of the state and what we want to put forward. So I don't disagree with either statement.
Okay.
And if we're signaling that we're friendly to these businesses, I think that's an important market signal.
Right.
If the legislature makes such a statement, that would be important for ISO New England to know. So it all kind of connects
Interconnected.
to each other. Yeah,
Okay.
but that's an important market signal to send, I think.
Yeah, I guess it depends on who you're sending the resolution to, really.
Yeah. Well, I guess it would be to the federal government, right?
I mean,
Urging
from
Congress, right?
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, from a site evaluation committee model here in New Hampshire, we have nothing in front of us. We are viewed, I think, as a state that's not friendly to power generation of any kind. And so if it's important to the legislature to send a message to the market that we are open for business, then those kinds of messages are important.
Okay. So it does have some effect, as you're saying.
It does. Yeah.
Next time we vote on a resolution, we'll.
Yeah. People are watching
Yeah.
closer than people think.
Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned this, but on Monday, Representative Michael Vose is the current chair of Science, Technology, and Energy. And he let me know about a program that's run by the National, I want to say council, but it's not council, National Conference of State Legislators. NCSL. Next week, they're running a program on state nuclear policy. So I'm going to go down to North Carolina on Monday, and we're going to talk to other state I have no idea what to expect, but we're actually going to take a tour of a plant down there. So I'll report back to the group, what I find out next week, and we'll send some signals that way. Tell them we're open for business.
Down south.
Yeah. All right, so this is a good point to ask, is there anything missing from these recommendations? And I'll open it up to our audience members here, our guests in the room. If you've had a chance just to look at those 13 items, and if there's anything else that that we're missing? Okay. Barney, do you have? Right, there's always going to be something that was overlooked. All right, anything else we'd like to add to that?
The only thing I would say is, I've had the opportunity to be like all over the country over the past year, and one of the debates that's being had, and they had the debate at NARUC, is our market's broken right now when it comes to electricity, and as I spoke to earlier, nothing's getting developed based on market revenue for the most part in New England, right? They're all out of market contracts. Whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. It's kind of the facts. So is that conversation is being had, does that bode well for nuclear or not? So the more you have out of market contracts, the more you suppress wholesale market prices, right? And
Distorts the market.
reduce, you guys know all about this. So, what's the future look like? And we probably can't get too involved in that, but I just wanted to raise it because it is an issue, and it is one that, again, we haven't developed a nuclear reactor in a deregulated jurisdiction ever. So does it have to be? Because if we're going to just move forward with all bilateral PPA, contracts, I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out there, but I mean,
So how would you put that into?
I don't know. It's just, I don't know if it's just a kind of a sidebar. There's a discussion about our markets delivering
re-regulate.
price signals that properly incentivize
Level playing.
and that's the question that's out there right now. And it's not partisan. There's folks that have long supported markets that are realizing that maybe they are broken and we need to kind of look at something else. So I don't know. I really don't know how to put it into words. I just wanted to raise it with the group and see if that's something that, it's probably a whole separate discussion, but it does impact nuclear.
I think I would just say the legislature has lots of options available to them. There's Unitil today is building a 5 megawatt solar farm, and so you could say, well, it's okay to build a 250 megawatt nuclear reactor. I mean, the legislature has options available to it. Right now, you've capped it at 5 megawatts, but there's nothing that says you couldn't change that.
That's a good, and maybe that's a possible policy recommendation to look at. That's going to open a whole can of worms up. Just
so you know, but
yeah.
it is possible. It's in your purview to change the limits.
I mean, you could put the genie back in the bottle if you wanted.
So this, you mean re-regulate the market and?
You could. I mean,
There's serious discussions being had about it right now.
But once you cross that 5 megawatt threshold, don't you get into issues with FERC and other things, federal?
I'm sure there would be a host of issues
Yeah.
to work, but ultimately, anything is possible. That's what I would say. I mean,
I know that 5 MW number seems to be a threshold or a barrier when we're talking about net metering and things like that. We see, once we rub up against that, we sort of get out of the purview of the states.
I think
That's a jurisdictional issue on compensation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you were to, what the chairman's talking about is a rate base issue, which, generally falls to state approvals. I think.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any federal limit. Mr. Shulock may know, may want to comment, but it's so far I'm not aware. I understand, Senator Pearl, what you're talking about with respect to net metering. I'm just not sure from a siting perspective there would be any jurisdictional boundary that I know of. Mr. Shulock, would you have any comment?
Once you get outside of that, metering, that 5 megawatt.
Okay.
David, sorry, just put your mic on. I'm sorry. If you don't mind. I know it's a pain.
We get used to it.
Yeah, we get used to it.
Once you get outside of the realm of net metering, and in-state compensation regimes.
Yeah.
That it's not, the 5 megawatt limit is not quite as important.
So like, let's say that they passed a law, allowing for utilities to build up to 10 megawatts, right? And let's say Unitil built a 10 megawatt solar facility. That's not subject to FERC jurisdiction, right? Or is it? Because it's rate based. I mean, I know.
Right, I
All
think
right, I
the-
don't feel so bad now.
No, it's
No,
easy.
I don't-
It's
I don't-
complicated.
I don't think it's a problem for the utility.
Right.
Right, it's, the problem with net metering and that sort of compensation scheme,
Correct.
right, has to do whether it's, with whether it's a wholesale transaction that touches the grid,
Right.
the
Sale for
regional
resale,
grid,
right?
yeah.
So it sounds like there's another suggestion here. I would need help putting it together. Is there a statute that we could reference that we could talk about modifying? Like
Yeah,
something-
perhaps Mr. Schillick and I could collaborate on something that would be unified.
Right, so it's the RSA 374 restructuring of the industry statute.
Okay.
That essentially required utilities to divest of their assets. The nuclear assets went first.
Oh, interesting.
And, they are otherwise prohibited from investing and owning those assets, right? Unless they fall under this distributed generation exception where they can build up to 5 megawatts.
Exactly. Yeah. So you could, in theory, call distributed generation 250 megawatts, and so, I mean,
Would you
that's,
target it just for advanced nuclear, or would you make it like agnostic?
I would, I'm careful not to make recommendations
understand,
other
yeah.
than to say what's possible.
Yeah.
And I, Mr.
So,
Schillick.
so of course, the big issue with this is who's responsible for payment.
Yeah.
Right? And it's ratepayers. And the last time one of our utilities constructed a nuclear plant, it went bankrupt, and ratepayers were required to pay for those excess costs for years.
But if we keep it small, right, like a
Right.
micro reactor size, right?
Yeah.
Like up to 20 megawatts or something, then the
The
risk is lower.
Risk is
That's
lower,
right.
yeah.
Just like the solar farms at 5 megawatts, the risk is pretty low. And that's what you're seeing now is the development of these smaller solar arrays that are utility owned. So you've kind of implemented that model on a smaller scale already.
It could fall under the non-wires alternatives too, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So would you guys mind collaborating on that and pull me in as needed, and we'll, is that all right? I mean, it sounds like
Sure.
something concrete that,
Yeah.
I'm grasping at concrete things here,
Yes,
Resolutions are one
we'll
thing.
talk afterwards and get you something.
Okay,
Yeah, we can do that.
all right, so I'll put a 14 here. All right, so we're almost done. It's been 2 hours. Would you mind indulging me in reading the conclusion? Because that's another thing I think
I
we
will
flip
be
through.
happy to indulge you.
Yeah. And then we'll be done.
All right, conclusion. In conclusion, New Hampshire may stand at a critical juncture in its energy policy, having the potential to become a net exporter of electricity to the rest of New England throughout strategic decision-making. The foundation of this transformation may lie in adopting advanced nuclear energy technologies that promise to bring reliable and cost-competitive electricity generation to commercial realization within the next decade. The analysis conducted by the Study Commission reveals significant progress in nuclear energy, particularly in developing advanced reactor technologies. These new designs offer enhanced efficiency and safety, making nuclear power more viable and attractive for large-scale energy production. By focusing on these innovative technologies, New Hampshire can establish itself as a leader in the advanced nuclear sector, positioning itself as a major electricity supplier in the regional market. Central to this vision is the emphasis on cost competitiveness. Advanced nuclear reactors promise to improve operational efficiencies and reduce life cycle costs, which could be a potential opportunity for New Hampshire to produce electricity at a lower cost than traditional fossil fuel-based sources. If this economic advantage is realized, it could allow our state to become a net electricity exporter, enabling the sale of clean and firm excess power at competitive prices to neighboring states. Moreover, focusing on advanced nuclear energy would align with broader energy reliability goals. Nuclear power plants can provide consistent and uninterrupted electricity, a critical factor in ensuring a stable and dependable energy supply for New Hampshire and the broader New England region, especially during the harsh winters we experience here. While the aspect of global warming is a significant consideration in the shift towards nuclear energy, the focus of this conclusion is predominantly on the economic and reliability benefits of this energy source. New Hampshire's adoption of advanced nuclear technologies would be a step towards a more sustainable energy future and a strategic economic move that can reshape the state's role in the regional energy landscape. With informed policy decisions, public and private focus, and investment in advanced nuclear technology, New Hampshire could transform its energy sector into a leading provider of reliable and cost-efficient electricity, becoming a net energy exporter within New England. This move could benefit the state economically and contribute to a more stable and diversified energy network in the region.
So I said net energy exporter 3 times in there. I was trying to add on like a positive, note. So if you could give me your critiques on that, and we can make some adjustments if needed, but just general thoughts on the conclusion.
I have, other than maybe trimming one of the net energy exporter,
Yeah, we'll take one of those out.
but no, I think it's good. I think
Can you
I think
change,
it strikes the right tone.
can you change global warming to climate change?
I could do that, yep. But, so that paragraph there, is that okay with everyone? So climate change considerations are driving nuclear. I think I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire state, but we focus more on reliability and economic issues. That seems to be our focus, but
We don't have any statutory requirements when it comes to carbon emissions or climate policies, really. So I think that's accurate.
it's okay.
Yeah, the state's policy is all around cost effectiveness that the Department of Energy has published, so that's I think at the center of what the New Hampshire policy is today. Doesn't mean there aren't other things to consider, but that's the center of it.
And the reliability is super important for where we live, right?
That's right.
All right, any closing thoughts? Thanks everybody for coming today and helping with the quorum, but would you like to come up to the microphone?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Alvin C., Merrimack County District 26. And I just wanted to suggest that maybe you may want to add a glossary to the end to cover acronyms and stuff like that, something like, not everybody knows what HALU is.
Yeah,
And there may be some technical terms relating to either nuclear energy or the normal electric power industry. Maybe 20 to 50 terms or something like that.
would you mind working on that?
I could.
Okay,
I would need to have a copy of the
I could send you a
report
file.
to hunt for the words that you've used.
Okay,
And the other thing might be useful early into the report would be a simple line graph that would compare energy levels, say from like megawatt, gigawatt, terawatt, and what they're useful for. What will a megawatt typically power? How much power does the city of Concord use? How many
so that could
megawatts
be
there?
part of the glossary then. You could have
and-
terawatt.
Hmm?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We could have megawatt, terawatt, and then in the definition kind of explain.
Well, I was thinking of a little line graph with little tick marks on there to point out, say, the output power of the Moe coal plant, and several other things, how much power the city of Concord uses, anything that people can relate to, just as an idea of how much power is used.
Okay,
Nothing real complicated.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
EIA has state level data. Maybe we just put a link in to to the EIAs,
It's
you know,
one of your
the
acronyms.
US DOEs. And that links to, right to New Hampshire, gives a whole bunch of state-specific profiles, you know, that may be
Okay.
helpful to the reader.
Could you send me that?
Yeah, I'll
link?
send you the link.
And we could put it in somewhere.
Yep.
So, Alvin, I appreciate your suggestions. You make the same $100 a year that I do, so any help that you can give would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
Just get $100 a year.
All right.
Do we need to vote on this or anything, or?
So that would be my next question. You know, we could have a signature page if everybody wants to sign it. And I thought maybe, I mean, in having served on other commissions, you know, if you're like in a department position, that you may be reluctant to do that, you know, so,
I think
that would be one option, is we all sign a piece of paper and we scan it, and
my suggestion would we would just have the chairman put the report in for the commission.
so we could vote on the report, with some caveats, right? So
When do we have to have this in?
it's due in statute, it's due today, which is why we have the meeting today. But I think, we could probably stretch that a couple of days to get it right. And I think getting it right's the most important thing.
So
Can I make a motion to approve with suggested amendments?
Yeah, is that okay?
second,
And then
that's what I was gonna do.
this weekend, I will make all those changes. We would need a glossary by then. I can send you this document after. And then we'll talk after the meeting on that. And then I'll track changes. I'll distribute over the weekend. I'll distribute exactly what was changed so you can quickly scan it,
Like a red line version.
red line version. And then we'll release that final product. So would people be willing to check their email on Saturday and Sunday and just reply? Is that all right with you?
No problem.
And then we'll get this released by Monday. Does that work for you, Alvin? Okay. Any objections to that approach? All right, do you want to make a motion?
He did, and I seconded.
Oh, you did already? Okay.
I seconded it, so
All right.
it's ready for you.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed? All right, that wraps it up. 3:00 on the dot. Thanks, everybody. This was an interesting exercise.
Thank you for putting in as much work as you did, because you carried 98.99 probably % of the load here, so,
Well,
That's base load.
you know.
He
Yeah.
carried the base load.
the base load.
We have to have,
And, the website will stay up. I'll keep it up for a couple of years. All of the documents, so it's nuclear nh.energy. All the meetings are listed there. I got I had to figure out how to do this. The official state link, you have to request permission if you want to post more than one document. So I did get that permission. And in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to migrate all of the meeting minutes and so forth over to the state site, so it's permanent. So it'll be in two places. So we'll have a record of all our work for posterity, hopefully. All right, motion to adjourn,
so moved.
second by
Second.
Mark. All right, all in favor to adjourn, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Meeting's adjourned.